a very common question that I got, like that I used to get when I was in university, and even I still get until now, is people asking like, "Hey, I want to get into, let's say, coding or something like this. Like, how do I get started? What should I work on?" And they're expecting an answer that's like, "Okay, work on this to-do list app with this framework and this whatever," which I think is totally the wrong way about going about it. In the end of the day, if there's something you're passionate about, you're going to be able to dedicate yourself to it much more. And so the general recommendation that I'd like to give anybody is
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our next episode of Moonshot Journeys, where we bring to you inspiring stories from Muslims around the world working on moonshot projects. So these are the projects which are not your typical one of the mill straightforward projects, but brothers and sisters who have been trying to achieve excellence in different fields where you didn't have success before and trying to go for moonshots essentially. And one of our key messaging here is that each one of us should be aiming for and aspiring for doing something like that, or even if you're doing something repetitive, to try to be the top 1% or the top 5% in your field instead of just wasting your time away on scrolling on social media and different things like that. So, with that, thank you and welcome, Mohamed. How are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and inshallah, I can share something that will be beneficial to the listeners, inshallah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again for making time for it. I know it's quite a busy time of the year as well as working on a startup, juggling different things. I really appreciate you making time for that. So let's get right into it. Inshallah, we can go as far back as you can recall. Did you? Yeah, maybe we go back to your high school time, right? At that time, did you know you wanted to be a developer, work in software or development industry, or what did you think back then? If you were to look back.
Yeah, so for me, the journey that I'm on right now kind of starts at the tail end of my high school time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was finishing high school, I kind of had some indication that I was interested in, math and science, and I wanted to be some sort of engineer. But I didn't really know what kind of engineer. I didn't really know what I wanted to, be involved with or anything like this. I also participated in the international baccalaureate program, and as part of that, with the school's limited course offerings, I didn't really have any chances to take like computer science courses or anything like that in my high school. And so I knew that I wanted to do some sort of engineering, but I didn't know what. And so at the tail end of my time in high school, like over, my final summer and things like this, I started to experiment a little bit with coding through taking some online courses and like just doing some online exercises and trying to build my own website and some basics like this to get a hand of it and understand like what the experience was like. And for what I did in that time, I really enjoyed it. A lot of what I was doing at that time was like expressing myself creatively through building my own website. uh, Thankfully, I don't run any creative parts of Tarteel right now because my creativity side from from a UI perspective, from an experience perspective, is not it's not good. So we'll leave it where it is. But I got to play around with things, and I remember like building games in Python and things like that. So when you're at that stage of any new challenge, usually that first learning piece is quite fun. Uh, Either that or it's quite terrible. I recently got to try out windsurfing, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't taught the proper technique. I wasn't taught the proper maneuvers. First day I went out on the water, the wind was very, very strong and the conditions were quite poor. And I spent most of the time swimming in the lake. Very little time actually doing anything that would resemble surfing. So usually your learning experience with any kind of new challenge goes one way or another. Either it goes very well and it's quite enjoyable, or it goes quite poorly and then you either drop it or you decide to stick with it and see what happens. Um, in my case, my learning journey with coding was quite enjoyable, but the question that came to my mind was, hey, I recognize that I'm in that learning phase. Is this still something I'm going to enjoy when I actually get to the hard parts? Is this something I'm going to enjoy when it's no longer, working on my own creative projects? It's like just day in, day out, working on tasks as part of, some professional role for the next however many years, 40, 50 years, who knows. And so that was a big question mark in my mind. And so I
And that
ended
was
up,
right when, even before high school or around high school time.
yeah, this was like exiting high school time where I knew I needed to apply to university programs. Lots of, pressure was being put from, the system as a whole to like apply to the right program, apply to these schools. And my grades were very, very good coming out of high school. So there was never really a question of where should I go in terms of getting accepted. It just, what did I want to do? And so I ended up applying to a program at Waterloo called Systems Design Engineering, which is a very broad program. You kind of touch on all kinds of different disciplines, and you become a little bit of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. But I figured that was the best opportunity for me to, in a structured format, get exposure to a lot of different disciplines, and then slowly over the course of a 4 year degree or 5 years with internships, figure out what I was actually interested in and move forward. Very quickly, like within my first term at Waterloo, I spent a lot more time working on coding, and I discovered like, hey, this is actually what I really enjoy. Systems design was the wrong program for me. Um, but if I wanted to change programs at that point, I would have had to go back and start over. And even though I was only, in my first year, uh, I didn't really want to make that decision. So I realized for me, I tend to be very self motivated, and so I realized if I want to succeed in software development, I have all the tools I need at my disposal through online learning resources. I have the chance to do internships as part of this program, and so I'm just going to teach myself. I'm going to kind of do my own thing and get through this program and go through that. And so that's what I ended up doing. Here I am today as a software engineer, but the journey started with a lot of kind of confusion and uncertainty. And then, pretty quickly, though, it evolved into a decision that, hey, this is the thing that I enjoy doing and I'm going to stick with it.
Awesome. So I think I would like to focus on a few things here, which I think are very important points. So firstly, so you kind of had this pull towards that you found that, okay, I love to do something with development. So not just something with computer, but actually something specific about developers. And I think did you kind of also started looking at what do people look for when you graduate as a developer? What would the companies be looking for, or you didn't worry about that?
So I didn't really worry about that. I know a lot of people go into software development either because A, there's a lot of jobs, and B, because those jobs tend to be quite high paying with all kinds of different benefits and stuff like this. These aren't things that I wasn't necessarily aware of at the time, but it wasn't like the thing that was guiding my decision in terms of what I wanted to pursue. It was more about I wanted to be working in a space where I could solve problems, and I could like leave an impact with the work that I was doing. And so that's kind of, coding was one avenue for me to try out in that space. And it turned out being, an avenue that I wanted to pursue. But that was kind of the framing and the objective that I had at the time.
Great. Okay, the second thing that comes to mind about like, when you were in your high school, you were already experimenting with these different things. Do you think that was again just the self nature of yours, or was it because of the friends that you had surrounded yourself with? Because especially at a high school age, you could have a lot of distractions that you could be distracted with.
Yeah. So I think it came from two things. Number one is my own interest to do things, and number two, also the influence of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
My parents had, encouraged, myself and my brother to try out various things. So we'd been involved with different sports. We'd been involved with a variety of different activities, and even, like they got us like some robotics kits where you put together like a little robot that's able to drive around or do small tasks and things like this. And so they also encouraged us to, check out coding as something that we could easily like pick up as as an activity where we could, do something useful and functional with it. And so they also had that positive impact on actually getting me to start.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think the key being that being exposed to different things and then finding your way. And I don't know. Did you find that your siblings kind of went some other routes, or they were primarily also interested in tech and engineering and stuff, or as they were being exposed to these different activities? Is anybody else ended up picking up something else?
Yeah, so my brother ended up also going into engineering, but he works more on like circuit design and electronics and things like this, less on the software side of things. But it's just he had the chance to try out everything as well, and that's what
Mm,
he ended up being passionate about. Like I think a lot of people resonate with the idea of he wants to build his own computer and he's building his own 3D printers and he's constructing his own things and for him like that side of things was much more interesting, and so that's the route that he ended up going down.
awesome. And another thing that I also picked up, and which I think is a really important message, that you were not just reliant on university. That hey, I want this some sort of a conveyor belt, a factory sort of thing, and by the time I graduate, they will just produce this awesome guy coming out of the university, and that really happens, right? And then just being able to take your journey in your own hand and know, okay, this is where I want to go, and I'm not just going to rely on the basic curriculum, that because that's the bare minimum. Everybody who will graduate will have that, right? I think this is something I really want to emphasize with the youth, that maybe in that time frame of their life is to experiment, and is to, if they know what they want to do, like try to excel in that thing, do your side projects or what have you. If you don't know what you want to do, then talk to other people, listen to podcasts, read books, or experiment with different things, because many people think, oh, I'm just going to be in university, and by the time I graduate, somehow I'll have this magical transformation. Would you agree with that, or would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I will definitely add to this in the sense that, like, alhamdulillah, exiting high school, I was a very strong student, like towards the top of my class. Um, and going into university, obviously, it's a shift and it's a transition. But for some other people, like they focus on still being top of the class, achieving the best grades, so on and so forth. And I think that there is a space where that does sometimes matter, especially if you want to pursue further studies, like you want to go on and do a master's and a PhD and whatnot. Certainly, your grades do matter. I think you need to understand what your goals are and then understand what is going to move the lever towards you having the most impact in that space and achieving the objective you want, instead of just listening to the voices that say, okay, focus on school, get good grades, so on and so forth. For me, a big part of my university experience was I will honestly say not attending classes, and even when I was attending classes, having my laptop open and working on coding projects on the side while I half listen to what's going on. um, Not necessarily the greatest thing to do in terms of form of respect for your professors and so on, but at least if you're not doing it in a disturbing way, you're at the back of the class and so on and whatnot, it's okay. But I did find overall, for me, I knew that I wanted to pursue a certain direction, which is I decided I want to be a software engineer. How can I be the best software engineer? And so for me, getting certain grades within my courses was not going to facilitate me necessarily getting better jobs. I realized very quickly, like my actual experience, my actual skill set and abilities, as well as the previous work that I can show for, that's what's going to allow me to get better positions. So I didn't focus on being the top student or getting the top grades. I focused on being the medium student who got the medium grades, and I went through, like, didn't fail any courses or anything like that. But at the same time, I spent a lot of time instead invested in developing myself, to the point that I started out, some of my peers coming into university already had legitimate kind of experience with software development. I had trivial experience through the one course I did and some experimentation and whatnot. um, but for me, like by the time I was reaching, for example, my fourth internship, I was already at the point where I was achieving what most of my classmates would consider to be the best internships out of anybody in our cohort. And so that's the area that I identified that I wanted to have a lot of progress and a lot of success in. And so I really tailored all of my efforts towards that. And I think it reflects on a broader concept which applies outside of university and applies outside of any of these disciplines, which is that you only have so much time that you've been
Mm,
given. Nobody becomes the expert at everything. Nobody becomes perfect at everything and does everything that they want to do. They're only going to achieve some subset of that, and they're going to have times for some subset of that. So I think being disciplined with how you schedule your time and being disciplined with how you understand your goals and then work towards them is quite important for anybody who wants to achieve success, whether it's in something as specific as software development, or whether it's in something as broad as your life as a whole. uh, you have to identify what your objectives are and then figure out what's going to get me to those objectives the most successfully. If you can leave options open by not failing courses and things like that, then I think it's good. But focus on where you want to go, and guiding the ship in that direction, and then hit the throttle at that point.
Beautiful. Yes, I think that's definitely very important. As you were talking about, I was thinking about it, and it's great you mentioned that. Like time management or focus management is a really important thing because you cannot just get everything done. It's just a matter of what you want to put, which amount of time of your life and what have you, while maintaining other things that are important like your soul and what have you. I think another thing that also happened from a procrastination perspective is if you think, oh, I'm just going to focus on university, and that's your mindset, but you say this, but you're not really spending 100% of your time. So basically, let's say if you're working on an assignment, it just takes 10 hours, and you may just allocate like 10 days or 2 weeks to it. You're ending up spending only 10 hours anyways, but because you don't feel like doing it, you're just dragging yourself and you end up wasting a lot of time. So having something that you can experiment and find being passionate about, like you had your coding project going on, would definitely help you to actually also be more efficient with your time, because now you're like, hey, I have this primary thing that I love doing, and I just have these other things that I have to get done. And this happens when you're business world as well. There's stuff that you just get done, and there's things that you enjoy and what have you. So I think that's a great example there. All
Yeah.
right. So do
I
you
want to
want
I want
to?
to add actually one thing here, which is uh, people figure out some itch that they have, some problem that they want to solve, or something that they actually care about, which can be accomplished by writing code, and then go learn whatever you need to learn in order to solve that problem, and then go to the next problem and go to the next problem and keep building the skill set based on that, because it's something that will keep you driven and motivated, as opposed to feeling like it's something that I have to learn in order to get the career I want, and then procrastinating on it.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that that's really important because you realize it, because something may sound good on paper, but hey, I've tried it, I've been disciplined about it, but I'm not getting anywhere. So that may be a good indication of changing something. And I think that's one thing you mentioned earlier, which I also want to highlight, is that when you're going to be learning new things, there will be, I mean, you will be uncomfortable, right? As you mentioned, give your example of
Yeah.
windsurfing, and that's something, that journey of growth, that I'm learning new things and I'm growing. That is something that has to be enjoyable for you for sure. Beautiful. Do you want to talk a bit about your internships or lessons from there, or should we move past your graduation?
Sure. So through the program that I went in, we have the chance to do up to 6 internships. So I did 6 full internships. I think the main lesson that comes from that time is that during that time early on in your career, it's a time where there's a lot to learn, and it's a time where you want to be growing continuously. I see some other places that, for example, have like a 16-month internship or a 12-month internship or things like this, or some people who end up working at the same company for like 3, 4 internships in a row. I think there's a specific use case for that, which is that once you get into a certain position and you start learning the skills there, you have a chance to go deeper based on that knowledge. So sometimes it can take you at a new job 3, 4, 6 months to actually, learn what you need to learn to be really productive and effective. And only at that point can you really go deeper on some problems. But I think those opportunities, especially early on in your career, actually tend to be pretty rare in terms of what you actually get entrusted with working on. So I would say, like, if you're doing internships, like 3 month, 4 month internships, something like this, you should be exiting those internships ideally having learned and improved in a noticeable way compared to the way you went in. And if that's the case, then you shouldn't be targeting returning to the same job unless they're going to give you more responsibility or let you go deeper, or something like that. Because at that point, like, you're targeting a space where you're no longer going to be able to learn. And I think optimizing for learning is something that's quite important in terms of moving your career forward as successfully and quickly as possible. So if I've come out of a certain job or a certain role having learned everything I can learn from that space, what I should be targeting is an entirely different space where I can try something different. Maybe it's a different type of company. Like, I was working at a large corporate entity and now I'm going to work at a startup, or vice versa, or something. Or maybe I was doing front end development where I learned some front end skills, but now I'm going to target something that's a bit more full stack to tie in the pieces together, or back end, or something else. Or maybe I'm going to work on apps now or something like this. I think if you stick with the same space, like if you stick with, okay, I'm going to do 4 internships in front end development, then that's fine as long as each of those roles is actually letting you go further and further in depth and then hone your craft. If it's just going to be kind of doing the same general work that you did in previous internships, I would say it's not the right fit for what you should be targeting.
Awesome. Yes, I think if I were to summarize a few things, so one is that think about that bigger problem that you are solving, right? And that will keep changing, right? And whatever that be, like I'm building this platform that will do X, and we'll talk about the Tarteel and how we got there. And then the second thing is, what role am I playing, right? And sometimes because you don't have a lot of support, you would have to play multiple roles, right? Especially the startup, you don't have support or what have you. You have to do multiple things. But then there's this primary thing that, okay, I'm a developer and I'm writing the fastest code or the complicated code or the artificial intelligence code or whatever, right? And then the second thing, so these two things, what's the problem, what role am I playing? And I think the third element from this discussion is be willing to change, right, and adopt. So don't be like you mentioned, for example, you started with a systems design program, and I think just reflecting back on my journey, so I started with what was considered cool, software engineering at UFT, and it sounded cool, but then I realized as I progressed out of my second year that, hey, this is more about design principles and the waterfall and this and that. I'm like, that's not what I want to do. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I just switched my specialization away from software engineering to something that gave me more flexibility, so I can now take more courses. I took compilers, math, analysis, cryptography, whatever, right? So you can don't be committed to one thing and be open to changing and adopting as you find new information. And as you mentioned, the 16-month thing, right? So that kind of reminded me of my journey. So UFT has a 16-month program as opposed to the 4 months. And it was great. I got into IBM working with the DB2 group. But out of my 4 months, I realized that I don't want to necessarily spend the next of the 12 months as an intern, while I can go back, complete my graduation, and either go for a master's or come back as a full time. So instead of just sticking to the normal 16 months, which most people did, like, yeah, I'm just gonna do 4 months, come go back to school, complete, and what have you. So adoption is the key thing, right? Don't be committed. If you find new information, you find new information about yourself, about the world, feel free to change. I think that's a key thing.
Yeah.
Great. So now we've come to it. You have graduated. To have you, and was your first one with Facebook/Meta or?
Yeah, so when I graduated, I did some of my internships at Facebook, and I decided to return there when I graduated. Um, the good thing about Facebook as a company was that they hired a lot of very smart people, and so it was one of those environments where, like, I still had a lot of peers that I could continue to learn from. Uh, like at that point, I was pretty good in terms of my core skill set of what it takes to be a software engineer, but there's a lot of growth in terms of how an engineer can grow past that point of just core technical skill, and so that was one of the things I was looking for, and I could get it there, and so I went there after I graduated, and I ended up staying there about 1 year and 3 months, and then I quit.
All right, so you just did one almost a year and a quarter. That's about it. And then was that one
Yeah.
product or?
So that time when I was there working full time, I was only working on one product, and I didn't quit because I actually lost opportunities to keep learning or anything like this. I quit over the company actually. The company has some very bad practices when it comes to Islamophobia and like propagating Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. All around the world, but especially specifically in countries like India, in Burma, and right now, like what we see what's going on in Palestine. So that was quite evident to me, and I did what I could from the inside as much as I could in terms of trying to right the ship and improve the state of affairs. But I realized that I wasn't going to be able to seriously change anything, and I didn't feel morally comfortable with working for a company that was having that impact around the world, and so I decided to quit.
Hmm. Okay. And then while you were doing that, were you working on your side projects or networking or had like or were you just like totally focused on your day job?
Yeah, so this is kind of where Tartil fits in, but Tartil actually goes back into university in the sense that Tartil kind of there was a long and storied journey with several different phases. But the first phase of Tarteel was actually a side project that I started when I was in university, where I had this problem where sometimes I would remember an ayah, or I'd be, listening to a khutbah and the imam would mention an ayah or something like this. And I want to find it in the Quran. Maybe I want to look at the translation or the tafsir or send it to somebody, or do something. And I can't remember like what surah it's from, where it is in the Quran. And so even though like I come from an Arab background, my ability to like write and type Arabic and so on is very weak. And so I would sit there like struggling trying like use an Arabic keyboard to like type in the ayah and search in like some kind of traditional search form. And I was like, I can tell you the ayah, like I can recite it to you right now, or at least a few words. I should just be able to do that and find the result. And so I ended up building that out for myself. And then first I built it as like, just a Python script that runs on my computer. And then people were like, hey, I want to use this too. And I was like, well, educating non-technical people about how to download Python and run a Python and executable and all this stuff on their computer, that's not really a great way to ship a product. So then I started learning Android development in order to actually be able to release it as an Android app. And from there, through many different phases, we end up at actually where we're at with Tarteel now. So Tarteel's kind of been ongoing in some format or another for almost 10 years now, actually. But in the form that most people recognize it, it's about 2 3 years old. But in really the format from where its origins came from, it's been almost a decade now. But that was kind of something I still was, had going on like while I was at Facebook. And so when I decided to quit Facebook, I said, okay, I have, I can just go to another company. Like I can just apply to some other company that I feel is more morally upright, and then just go work there. Um, but I decided like, hey, I think there was also like some progress in Tartil that made me and my co-founders think like, hey, this is something that we could actually build out as a business. And in fact, it's not that we could, but it's that we must build out as a business because of the challenges with actually developing like ML models and building out this kind of caliber of technology. Doing it in the format we'd previously been doing it, which was like, uh, you know, nonprofit, open source, volunteer approach, was not really leading to any of the results that we felt like the community deserved to have. We felt like there was a huge opportunity for impact with what we were building, and that the approach we had been taking, which is work our regular jobs, do this as a volunteer thing on the side, I was never going to get it there. And so at that point, it was a good opportunity for me to just quit Facebook and start working on Tarteel full time as kind of a serious startup. And so that's the transition I ended up making.
Okay. So, few tidbits to pick up on here. So, when you were looking at the problem of, well, I have an I or part of an I in my mind, and how do I get to it, right? So, I'm assuming you looked for solutions at that time, or have you didn't find anything like, okay, this is my problem, I'm gonna work on it, and then you got some validation by other people asking you for that as well. And was that from in that perspective a voice to search thing, or was that just like text based?
Yeah, so at that point, it was basically a voice search thing. I was looking for some solution where I can recite and I can see the results. And I figured that there's only two ways to go about this. One through some sort of like audio like matching and then like filtering and whatever, in order to find those results, or to like convert to another medium, which is text, and then do the searching in text. And so that's basically I realized that's the best approach for me at that time to take. Uh, and so I found Google at that time had like their cloud speech service, not as like a full blown API you could subscribe to like it is today, but they had it built into Android, and somebody had figured out how to kind of use it and bundled it as a Python package. And so that's what I originally started with, in terms of taking that package, using it to do converting your recitation to text, and then doing a search with the text, and then returning to you the results. And so that's how it started out, and until now, that's the general concept of what we do in Tarteel. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated now in terms of the individual pieces. And as well, it allows us to do much more. Like we can actually correct your mistakes in your recitation and things like that. But that's the original principle that I kind of came up with and started exploring. and that's ultimately what we still use as a general concept tool today.
So the voice recognition element at that time, did you already have on Android the ability to do voice-based search, or it wasn't there at that time?
So on Android, you had the ability to do speech to text, which was built into the platform with some limitations. Like I believe it was up to 30 seconds, and you had to have internet and some stuff like that. But within those constraints, you could do voice search, and you could actually do it for free. And then Google would give you back the transcript, and then whatever you want to do with the transcript is up to you. And so that lent itself very easily towards. That's why actually I started with building an Android app, because I was using Google's speech text service, which was available for free on the platform. And so I was then able to go and build out that experience into the app, and release it in that format. Later, Apple started making their own speech text available on their device. And then there started to be cloud speech APIs. And now, every big company has its own cloud speech API for speech text and whatnot, as well as a number of small companies. And we use our own models. So at this point, we don't use any of these offerings from any of these companies. We use our own models, which are more accurate.
So how did okay? So perhaps we now shift into that was like iteration one, basic voice to text, and that's what happened to me, right? When the first introduction I got to Tarteel, and there's way more now, and I think we'll follow that journey and talk about the new features and the ones I love. And was like, well, if I just have to find an AI, that's what I do. I just like go on Google search, turn on voice to text, and boom, it will just give me the name and the words number, what have you. So that
Yeah.
was your iteration one, and then when did you guys start thinking about ML? Did any Arabic models exist at that time? I guess maybe even before that. So when did you start having co-founders or some core team around it? And then we go into the ML, I guess.
Yeah. So all those questions actually kind of bundle into one. So I can answer kind of all of them
Sure.
with one shot, which is um, from the beginning, like the challenge with this kind of technology is accuracy.
Mm.
When I'm doing the speech to text for your Quranic recitation, how accurate is that? If it's 100% accurate, it's very easy to do the searching of the Quran because I can find the results. So what you were doing with Google speech text in their own products and then searching that, for example, is essentially what I was doing with a slight difference, which is that in my app, I knew you were searching the Quran. So there were certain things I could do, like, oh, Google output this, but I think that you probably actually said this because I know that these words are not in the Quran and this is. And this word sounds similar. So I could do some fuzzy matching. And like, because I know the intention of what your speech is, even with the quality of the transcript being low, I could still do like a much better job searching than what like Google might do on a very generic case, where it's searching from anything that could possibly exist that it's got indexed. And so that was the first start, but the problem from the very beginning was accuracy. Google speech text was not accurate enough. Like it was accurate enough that search was a reasonable experience, but anything beyond that was not. So from very early on, people were like, "Hey, this is great," but like I wish that this could like show me what's being recited during Taraweeh. That was one of the examples people gave. Or people were like, okay, if this can listen to me, like it should also correct my mistakes. So that's another example that people gave. Which again, like these kind of actions where you're following long term or where you're trying to correct mistakes, they require varying levels of accuracy, and the accuracy wasn't there. And so that's where this question of okay, how do we solve this from an ML perspective? How do we get more accurate models aside from waiting on Google with their own roadmap and their own priorities and their own interests to
Of course, it's gonna
continue
be
to
the
improve the
Quran first,
technology?
right?
Yeah, they're not focused. It's never gonna work. Actually, early on, I also had Google researchers reach out to me, like Muslims within Google, who found out about what I was doing and were very interested. And I wanted to see if there was anything they could like build off of. I was like, actually, I'm using your services for part of this. But that was something that came up early on. But accuracy was really the name of the game when it came to building any kind of future extension of what I was doing. And I didn't have a background in ML. I didn't have like the relevant experience for that. I didn't know any kind of model training. If you want good accuracy, you need very large amounts of data. So that becomes another challenge. Like, where is that data coming from? There's some general corpuses for like English, for Arabic, for other languages. Arabic being much smaller, for example, than some other languages like Mandarin or English. But there was some small data sets available of like speech to text data that could be used for training, but nothing on the scale of what was needed, nothing targeting the Quran. And so that was very clear to me as being the problem that needed to be solved to unlock progress. Uh, Around that time where I was dealing with some of this stuff, I also was doing my first internship at Facebook, and I was in California, and I had the chance to meet, a lot of great brothers over there in California working in the tech field. And one of those brothers ended up actually becoming one of my co-founders. I was telling him about this project, and he was, very interested in this project, and he wanted to see it move forward.
So
And
just to pause. So at that till up till that time, you were just running a one man show, just getting feedback from some users and what have you, right? So just like a solo dedicated person. Would that be correct?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So at that point, he was like, okay, this ML problem is like its own challenge to tackle. Like, how do we build models for the Quran for Muslims in order to achieve more? And he also knew and introduced me to an individual at Stanford who was doing his PhD in like in machine learning and so on. And so that individual really took the lead on tackling the machine learning space of like how do we collect a data set to be used for training models for the purposes of Quranic recitation and speech text in the Quranic domain. And so that's kind of he ended up bringing on. I ended up having four co-founders when we actually like made Tarteel into a formal startup, and those four co-founders were essentially the four individuals who are most involved and committed and moving the project forward in that non-profit open source volunteer space that we were in prior. And so um, that individual that I first met in California, he ended up bringing on one of the other co-founders, and then another, the fourth one of our co-founders found out about the project online, reached out, and then just started getting involved. And that's how we ended up, eventually building out the team.
Awesome. All right. So do you want to talk a bit more about co-founder? I think this is one of the key things, right? People make a lot of mistakes, fun, but just okay, let's get together as friends, and then you realize not pulling their weight or equity issues and whatnot. So for new folks out there that may be working on a problem, I think one thing I would definitely want to highlight at this point. Look, guys, it's not about overnight success, right? So that sometimes we just think that. I mean, you already mentioned it's been 10 years, and I think the first 5 or 6 you were just pretty much by your own, right? And that is something really important that you have to keep digging, right? You have seen those memes where it's like, well, your diamonds may be like 20 feet down the road and you've just done 10 feet, and someone else may just find a few, maybe with a 5 feet of digging, but they only had a few jewels, a few diamonds there. You have like 20 or hundreds of them, but at a higher depth. And then just keep going. It's a really key thing. Just that don't quit and don't think that you're going to be an overnight success. So with that, like, yeah, let's talk a bit about your advice on some of the questions, the things that you would like suggest to people to think about when they're building a co-founder team as opposed to an employee, which is obviously an important part as well, but not as important as the co-founders.
Yeah, so I think when you're looking for co-founders in order to start a business or even to grow a business, I think some of the core things you want to look for is number one, value alignment. Like if you're going to be making core decisions for the company on a regular basis with these individuals, and they're going to have a large stake in what you're going to end up building, both now when things probably don't matter as much, as well as later when hopefully your company is worth millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions or whatever it is, then you want to be making those decisions with people who have the same kind of moral compass and some kind of. They don't have to be carbon copy of you with all the same thinking. Having diverse sets of thinking is actually beneficial towards being able to achieve the best outcome in a variety of situations. But in terms of core morals and ethics and things like this, I would say that value alignment is pretty important. And it's one of the core things like we made sure we assess within our team. Like, how all my co-founders are Muslim and great people and everything like this. But like that's one of the things that we explicitly also kind of assessed for in the beginning. Another thing that I would focus on is like everybody should be adding value in their own way. Like if you're gonna start a business, you're gonna co-found it with, let's say, like, I don't know, you're trying to build an app and you had this idea and you're a web engineer, and you pick two of your friends who are web engineers. None of you have ever built an app. None of you have any experience with business. None of you have any experience with design, with sales, with whatever it's going to take in order to make your specific context for your business successful. I would say like that's not a great starting point. A lot of times when people are successful in founding something, and that thing is going to be really successful, usually it's solving some problem where the team who's solving it also has some unique edge in terms of their ability to solve it. That edge could be technical in terms of like maybe you're solving a super hard machine learning problem and you've got the world's leading machine learning experts on your team. Like that's one way to kind of have that edge. But sometimes it can be other things like domain knowledge. So for example, like I've seen businesses where you want to start it in the legal space or in construction or in healthcare or something like this. Often, at least one of those co-founders has some background in that space. I've got a friend who just started a startup recently in like a construction field, basically, and part of the core problem that they're solving, one of their co-founders already had experience like in the way that that thing is done now without the significant improvement that they're bringing with AI and whatnot. The co-founder had experience doing that task in the manual way already, and so that gives him insight on like understanding the domain, understanding the problem in detail, understanding like having network connections and things like that to reach out to for user research for different things. It gives a small leg up. It's not to say like I've seen stories where founders who have no background in the space all of a sudden build a successful company in that space. It's not to say that you can't do that, but obviously the more the more relevancy you have within your co-founding team towards solving that problem, the more of a leg up you have in terms of actually being able to solve it successfully and get to where you want to go. And so I think that's the other thing in terms of looking for co-founders. I would say make sure everybody's adding value in some certain way, and that you're able as a team to work together to sort through issues and to align on things. Other things like equity and so on and the financial aspect, I've seen different pieces of advice on it, and I don't have any strong opinions here in terms of how you should sort that stuff out and whatnot. I think it's probably better for listeners to go and do their own reading on that, see different opinions and whatnot. But yeah.
What would be some value questions that will be top three for you, like when determining value alignment?
So I think one of the questions like understanding where they actually want to see the project go, as well as like what their personal objective is with it. Like I'll give you an example, like with a company like Tarteel, for example, our goal is not about maximizing like our own financial return with the project. Like we're all committed to this project for the sake of like Islam, for the sake of like bettering the state of our ummah. uh, and that's like a core thing that we care about. So in the way that we have to make many decisions, whether it comes to like hiring or investment or like the business practices as a whole, always we're going back to various different Islamic principles and like different things based on that. Whereas like there are you might have another business where everybody who's co-founding it, they don't even care about the space. They just care about, I want to build a business because I want to be successful and I want to make money, and there's
So that's
nothing wrong
something
with
else.
that. Yeah, like there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's great
But yeah,
to
that
build a
wouldn't be
business.
aligned. Yeah.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be aligned depending on who your other co-founders are and maybe what the space of the business is. So understanding what people's personal like goals are and where they're coming from, I think that's a very important first piece, because the larger the company gets, the more as well like you're going to have other voices coming in, whether it's your employees, whether it's your investors, whether it's like anything else like that's your partners that you're doing business with. There's going to be all kinds of decisions that you have to make, which not everybody in the same circumstance would make the same decision. The best decision is relative to the person making it or the team making it, and is not necessarily relative to the outcome specifically. Like we see a lot of these kind of things actually, like right now is a good example of this, in the sense of there's going to be people and businesses which you don't want to partner with because they are involved with certain activities, or they're involved with supporting certain like political movements or things like this. And those groups, if you don't want to get involved with them, it might not be the easiest or best route in terms of money. Like if somebody comes to you with $100 million check or something like this, which you want in order to grow your business, like that's a lot of money. In order for you to be saying, hey, I'm going to take this or I'm not going to take this, at the end of the day, it might be very beneficial for your business, especially in the short term. But the question becomes, Like, are those the kind of people you want to work with, and how does that impact the direction that you're going to be able to take after? And so having those values is quite important there. Even in terms of marketing, for example, in terms of how you make certain decisions or frame certain products in the business, there's a lot of importance there. Like, one of the things that we agreed on as a team early on is like, we're not going to do any of these kind of deceptive tactics. Like, lots of companies will straight up lie in their marketing, right? Uh, and that's something that you see as a normal part of marketing. Or other companies will do things which like are very, very questionable in terms of privacy practices. And we see this unfortunately in the even in the Islamic product space. Like, one of the largest Islamic apps, it was made by a non-Muslim, and they did all kinds of very, very questionable things in terms of building the business for the sake of money and not for the sake of the benefit of their users. The way that they fill the app with ads, and they don't really filter the content of the ads, and they sold user data. Like, they made all kinds of business decisions which were the best outcome for them and the best outcome for the company, and they were absolutely not the best outcome for the Muslim community and their customers. So ultimately that has an impact on the success of the business. But even so, like, there are things that, like, you want to be making those decisions the right way from the beginning. And so understanding where somebody's coming from, I think, is important.
Beautiful, awesome. Okay, so in terms of investment, do you have anything to add there, like raising investments or thinking about raising investment? Yes, no, when?
I mean, I think the general caveat when it comes to raising investment is that the more money you raise, the less control you'll have, because you're introducing, equity to people who are not you, who are not your founding team. So I think that that's important to keep in mind in terms of the direction that you want to take with your company, and in terms of the control that you're going to end up having afterward over some decisions, and about certain framing, and about the even the brand and the perspective of a company as a whole when you bring on certain investors. So overall, like, I think this is something which doesn't get considered as much you know outside of a Islamic mindset when it comes to building businesses, but it's very important when you have the Islamic mindset, which is that you have certain ethics when it comes to business. Like, Islam gives us like business ethics that are quite important to follow. And so being able to run your business not just in the short term but in the long term in a way that you feel is sound and you feel is like Islamically appropriate, even if that business has nothing to do with Islam on a from a product basis. Like, you could be building something for healthcare, or something for construction, or something for whatever discipline, or a food delivery app, or whatever it is that you're building. There might not be an Islamic element. Like, it doesn't have to be that you're building a Quran app or something like this. But the way you run your business, you want to run it with the appropriate Islamic mindset. And the more control you give up to people who don't share that mindset, the more of a risk you're introducing for yourself there. So I think that's the main thing that I would caution when it comes to trying to build a business, or even just trying to build any kind of partnerships and so on in general. We see this in the political space. We see this in a lot of different spaces where people are trying to build, coalitions, with groups that are not aligned with them on many issues and things like this. I think, like, a lot of care needs to be taken to frame things in the way that you have the appropriate safeguards in place, so that you're not being put in positions where people are trying to push you always to compromise on your beliefs.
Awesome. All right. Okay, so as we come towards the end with some quick questions, before that, do you have any, like, a technical journey or even a business problems? Okay, well, these are some of the key things that we hit, and perhaps a minute or two on how you solve that. So obviously, one thing that kind of came up earlier was data collection, right? Just having that sort of data to run ML on, or perhaps it could be other business sort of obstacles that you sort of overcome, and there may be like some learning there.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different approaches people make to building products, in the sense that uh, for some products they need to be complete kind of from day one.
Mm.
Like, you can't, like, if you're building something in healthcare, for example, you can't release your half finished surgical tool. Like, it has to be complete, it has to be tested, it has to go through clinical trials, it has to do whatever in order to actually be out there. A lot of stuff in the software space, though, you can release it kind of at an MVP point and continue building features. It's very common in the space. So with what we did, Tarteel originally started out as just search, and then Tarteel added basically what we call follow along, which is it can follow along with your recitation as you go through multiple ayahs and keep track of what you recited. That required a different level of accuracy, but we were able to unlock that with some algorithmic improvements as well as with some improvements to the models being done by even Google. Like originally we released Fall Long, it was using Google's Cloud Speech API. Um, and then ultimately, we've unlocked more improvements by building our own model, which, as you said, there are certain technical challenges we had to overcome. So, one of the biggest ones for us was data collection and annotation, where we had to actually collect very large amounts of Quranic recitation data. And then we had to actually get it labeled. So, not just we have the audio, but now we have the exact transcript of what was recited in that audio. And then we can feed that to models and iterate on, how we train the model in order to actually get more and more accurate models to deploy as part of our AI solution. So that was one of the things we had to overcome, and we had to release we released Follow Along as a product. I think at least a year, if not more, before we released mistake detection, which was kind of our first flagship feature that everybody was actually waiting for the whole time. Um, when we released Follow Along from day one, people were like, okay, but this should be able to, if it can follow my recitation, it should be able to detect my mistakes. And we knew that that was the product that people actually wanted. Like Follow Along with solving some problems. People use it a lot, for example, in Taraweeh and things like this, but uh, it wasn't the core problem that a lot of people were reaching out to us with. And so what we did is we took the iterative approach where we said, hey, let's build this out in stages. We'll improve the following along fuzzy matching part of the algorithm, and then as the accuracy improves, then we can start actually being confident in reporting mistakes. And so we continue to work on the technical side of it in the background. And that technical side is just a matter of uh, continuously like building up that data set, getting it annotated, and then training models in an iterative approach, and then testing them, deciding like what are the next steps that need to be taken to get more accuracy, and just it was a very iterative process until we reached a point where the accuracy was there to release mistake detection. And even when we released mistake detection as a feature, we only released it at like a word level. So you said the right word or you didn't, or you missed a word or you said an extra word. We didn't even count, for example, like character level mistakes. Like you said the right word mostly, we're gonna count it as being correct. Even if it was one letter off or something like this. And so that's where we originally released that. Then we kind of got to character level fidelity, where like now it's much more accurate. Like even if these two words sound similar, we're still going to distinguish and we're still going to catch as a mistake. And then we got to the point where we can start correcting tashkil. So now, and again, even our tashkil detection is not yet at the level we'd like to see it, but it is there and it's available in the app where some of your tashkil mistakes can actually be corrected in the app. And in the background, we're working on tajweed correction. So being able to correct those mistakes is like a big thing people are looking for as well, and that's something we're continuing to iterate on in the background. But we took this very iterative process towards solving these technical challenges, which is like, what's the base case? What's the MVP we can build for this? How do we get to a point where we build it? And then, how do we get to the next stage? It's not always been the same process from day one. Sometimes you've had to do different things through each of those different stages in order to get to the outcome we were looking for next.
Awesome. All right. So coming back to some of the personal challenges that happen, especially when you're running a startup and you're motivated by it, or you're just doing a regular full-time job and what have you, right? So there may be a lot of either demand from work or business or partners, co-founders, and also like a personal pull towards it. But at the same time, there are other things that are important in life which may not be as attractive or as pulling as business or whatever you're working on. So how did you manage your family life, your Islamic life, and what have you? Was that discipline, having a routine? What would you say about that?
Yeah, so I think this is something I will admit I've had a good amount of trouble dealing with over the last few years. Especially in the beginning of a startup, like you're really, tied in and focused on what's going on. Uh, I'm not necessarily saying this is always the case, but in my case, for example, it meant working a lot of hours. A lot of the weeks in the beginning, I was working 80 hours a week usually. And so once you kind of get to that point, uh, there's, compared to a regular professional job, like I lost 40 hours in the week. So obviously there's some things that are going to go there. Um, it was always an issue in terms of finding that balance. There's certain things which I just decided, okay, this isn't as important to me. I'm going to deprioritize it. There's some things which I've had to be very rigorous about building a schedule. Some things I've had to work on is, building an accountability partner for certain parts of that, like for fitness, for example, like having somebody to go to the gym with, or do different activities with, or getting involved with the group. For example, like one of the things I did, even when I was working those kind of long hours, was I had a group that I would play soccer with, uh, and that group, like I wasn't going to that group because like it was all my friends or something like this, or whatever, but it was something that was scheduled, which I kind of had to sign up for. It's a commitment that like I commit to, and as long as I just kept that regular cadence, then like at least I was getting that physical activity on a regular basis. So because it was scheduled with other people like than myself, where it's not like I can just say, okay, let me do it in another hour or something like this, like there's a group involved, then I kind of had to either commit or not. And so having that regular commitment where there's some kind of outside factor, that I found very helpful towards staying physically active, for example. There's other things as well where uh, you know, uh, one of the things like just being able to sometimes take a step back and take a break. So that's one of the things that I think vacations, like I tried the whole working vacation previously, where I brought my laptop with me. I went away for 3 weeks, and I was kind of semi working, semi vacation for that whole period of time. And that ended up working pretty poorly for me. I didn't quite be very productive at work, nor did I really enjoy my vacation. Recently, I took a proper vacation where my laptop stayed at home, or actually, I left it with a family member in case there was any emergency that I had to like call back in and have them help me work through. But that's the life of a startup founder. But in the end of the day, I left my laptop at home. I said, okay, I'm not working during this time. I'm actually off. I've delegated my different responsibilities to different individuals, and I'm gonna enjoy that time. And I think carving out that space to, if you're not able to maintain the appropriate balance, at least during your regular weeks, then at least carving out the space to catch up a little bit on those things, whether it's physical activity or like time with family or something like this. At a minimum, I think you have to figure out how to do that and do that effectively.
Awesome. All right. So in terms of like even the time commitment, would you say that you guys had like across the board similar time or effort expectations from the co-founders, or is that like variable as long as you get your work done, whatever your area of responsibility is?
So I would say, like in general, the problem with the framing of get your work done is like in a startup, you never get your work done
Yeah.
because there's always more work, and the progress that the startup is going to take on to some degree is proportional to the work you do. Like in the context of a startup, you're understaffed. There's a huge amount of work to be done in a variety of different roles without necessarily super clear ownership all the time of that stuff. And so there's never been, for the last 3 years, I've never been sitting around like, there's nothing for me to work on. There's nothing for me to do. I'm waiting for somebody to, give me my next task. I've finished my work. There's not been a single day where that's happened. And so, that's part of the issue of finding balance, which is like, I want to set certain goals for the company, for the team, for myself, whatnot. I want to work towards those goals. And then I want to, put in the work to try to achieve that. And if I can do more, I'll do more. And if I need to, like fall back on some things like that, that might happen because, if all of you are working as much as you can and putting that through, then there's no other like, resources there to pick up necessarily. So, I would say like, uh, everybody kind of shared the same expectations within the team of like, this is the pace we're going to work at, this is the objective we're working towards, this is kind of what it's going to take, and that was basically the shared understanding.
Awesome. Great. And so even when it comes to decision making per se, like would you say this is mostly like a majority sort of thing, or well, this is your domain, so you're the main lead on that, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so there are certain things for which we divided up responsibility. um, like we, like I can give a few, for example. So one of my co-founders leads all of the work on machine learning. So he is the one who's kind of in charge of machine learning. He knows what's going on with machine learning. He's the one, when we hired additional people to work on machine learning, he's the one who manages them, so on and so forth. Then there are certain parts of the project that, like, for example, like I take the lead on the app. So everything to do with the app, especially anything to do with engineering, but even more broadly, product decisions for the app in general, I kind of have the most say on a lot of that stuff. And even again, when we hired more people to work on the app, I ended up being the one who's managing those people working on the app, for example. Even though like both of us are engineers in the end of the day, but we still divide it up within engineering what needs to be done there. Not to say that other people can't have input and whatnot. Like everybody in the team, even if they're not an engineer, can have impact on all of these things. But um, but in the end of the day, like we divide up the roles in that regard. Even there's other things like bookkeeping, for example. We have somebody who is primarily in charge of bookkeeping, and even like we have operations in more than one country. So there's bookkeeping in each of those countries, and so one of us is in charge of one country and one of us is in charge of actually the other country. um, so you get into situations like that where there are certain things that we specifically assigned, and then there's other things which, as a team, you kind of take on, especially as a founding team, you take on more broadly. So sometimes it'll be things in terms of, making certain decisions about culture, about like practices in the company, about ideation, about the product roadmap, different things like this, where it's not so much focused on one individual. It's a bit broader. Still, you might assign certain things. So whenever we come up with certain, product implementations that I want to take forward, I have one of my other co-founders who usually takes the lead on actually fleshing out some of those things for the product and designing it. But like in terms of ownership over the product roadmap as a whole, it's kind of distributed across the team with no owner for that thing. So I would say in general, assigning things to people where there's like somebody chiefly responsible, just so that you're making sure that everything is kept track of and everything is moving forward, is a good approach. But it won't necessarily be like a perfect clean cut and now you should operate in a silo and stuff like this. It's good to have that collaboration.
Great. All right. So, in terms of recommendation for content, like, do you have any books or podcast recommendation for our audience?
Yeah, so I would be remiss to not plug. We have actually a Tarteel podcast for anybody who's looking to do like hifd, or even just to re-inspire themselves in terms of their relationship with the Quran. Like I've personally found that that podcast was very beneficial in terms of a lot of great reminders, a lot of great lessons, and a lot of very inspiring stories as well. There's people who call into that podcast and talk about their own hifd journey. Um, and I think everybody, like, aside from the student health journey of like, I as a kid, 12 years old, was in health school and I went through it for 3 4 years and I became Hafid. Aside from kind of that story, there are actually many people, mashallah, who've memorized the Quran and who figured out how to do it in different stages of their life. Whether it's people who are like, elderly, and this is what they've decided to finally do as one of their things that they've wanted to do throughout their life, or people who managed to figure it out in terms of figuring out the balance even with their family and with work responsibilities and everything. So I would say that there's lessons and advice and stories that you can relate with for anybody across any age. So that's one that I personally have really enjoyed. um, Aside from that, I would say like there's a lot of, I don't have a specific podcast or a specific piece of content that I want to recommend, in the sense that my learning style, my approach to learning is generally like, instead of following one individual or one channel or something like this, um, I will like focus on what I want to learn and look for the best content for that thing. So there's been things when it came to like how to start a startup that they came from incubators like YC and people who are affiliated with those incubators, like Paul Graham, for example, and so on. So there's been content there that I found really useful. There's been lectures from like university professors on how to do B2B sales that we found really useful, for example. um, in terms of like becoming a better engineer, there's all kinds of different peers that I have work across a number of different spaces, a number of different companies, who've like published content which I've found useful for learning. So I would say like my overall advice, rather than recommending like specific pieces of content, uh, is look for what it is that you want to do, and then see like what some of the best resources are for that domain, and be willing to like explore different ideas and explore different voices, so on and so forth. Different people also have their own different biases for how to approach different tasks. and they also have their own context in which they're doing it. Like I'll give you a good example that will, separate from coding. Um, I've done like a number of different handyman kind of jobs in the past. Like for example, I've built a fence and I've built a patio and some stuff like this. Um, when you're doing those jobs, you can find like tons and tons and tons of content published by, different individuals on YouTube. You can find it published by companies like Home Depot or Lowe's or Rona or whatever, things like this. You can find it. You'll find different pieces of advice published by manufacturers for the wood or for the tile or for all these things. Each of these people has their own reason for putting out that content, and each of these people has their own context within which they're operating. So the guy who's just doing this himself on YouTube might not have all the best considerations for like the long-term best case well-being of the project, but he will probably show you all the tips and tricks which will allow you to avoid spending tons of money on very expensive tools. So if you're trying to do, just build this yourself and stuff like this in a practical way without getting in over your head, that's a great place to start. And then if you want all the like, the professional instructions and the details, and of course come and rent all these very expensive tools and whatever, you go into like a guide from Home Depot, or you go into a guide from like a very professional contractor who's basically putting out this content to show how difficult it is and how sophisticated it is, but how good of a job they can do, so that you hire them. So with those different intentions that people put out that content with, and with the different contexts in which they're coming, you can get very different insights. And so what you want to do again is understand like what it is that I want to achieve. Okay, I want to achieve a patio that's still around for the next 5 years, but that I can do with the tools that I have in my garage, and maybe one or two rentals from one of these like hardware stores. Where's that balance? Like, take some information from this guy and what the best practices are, and then take some information from this guy and like, now that I know what the best practices are, like what tools I can use within my reach to actually achieve those as close as possible, and then like balance it together. Or like maybe you're like, hey, I'm building this because like I want this to last forever and I've got the money to just spend on it, and maybe all I do is I watch a professional contractor and say, okay, I'm happy with his work, I'm gonna hire him to do the job, and then you get the result you're looking for that way. So um, again, different people will have different contexts within which they approach the content that they want to consume. And so I, rather than suggesting specific content, I like to take that kind of approach, which is starting from, what is it that I want to achieve, and then like who can best give me that information relative to my own context.
Awesome. All right, so this brings us to the last segment. So we have been doing something on our channel called Chronic Transformation, where we bring different guests and we just focus on a few verses. But I think it's a good idea to just like add that as we wrap up the Moonshot Journeys episodes as well. So I would suggest that if you can just maybe pull up either a random page of Quran or a section or a verse or two, or maybe the last one that you're at, and then perhaps we can just see what kind of benefits we can drive and then end with, inshallah.
Sure. Let me see here. Okay. All right. So I've got here Surah Shams.
All right, what chapter is that?
That is chapter 91.
91. All right, and which verse are we talking about?
I've just got it. Like I'm at the start of that page
Okay.
595 in my mushaf, and just at the start of it.
Okay, great. So sounds good. Okay, yeah. So maybe do you want to recite a few verses, or just look and reflect on what jumps out to you from a practical implication and how you can apply that in your life?
Sure. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها. صدق الله العظيم.
Okay. So as you reflect on these verses and what jumps out to you that you can apply in your day to day?
So one of the things about these verses is talking about all of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created and some of kind of the unique aspects of those things. So like in the first verse, for example, uh, I've got the translation here, by the sun and its brightness, and then the second one, and the moon as it follows it, and the third one, and the day as it unveils it. uh, I think one of the things here is, uh, it's talking about different things have specific attributes to them. Like it's not that everything is the same or everything is general or whatnot, but various things have its own reason for creation and its own special attributes. I think this actually translates very well when we think about business, and one of the things that we talk about a lot in terms of this concept of careers as a whole, actually, which is that the point we made earlier, which is not everybody is going to learn everything and do everything and be the best at everything. Even when I think about the time of the Sahaba, for example, different Sahabis are known for different characteristics. Some of them were great generals, and some of them were noted for their business acumen and their wealth, and some of them were noted for their justice and their compassion and whatnot. And so when you take into account those different factors, uh, it's kind of a good reflection that everything that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala created has special attributes and characteristics. And when we're looking at ourselves or we're looking at others, one of the things that we should look at is try to understand what are those I guess special characteristics from creation, and then how can we like use that knowledge by understanding those things.
Jazakallah khair. It's beautiful. And just to add to that, I think another thing that I like to, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning is creation, I think we get desensitized by the fact that, well, Allah created it, right? And they just exist, right? We can kind of become accustomed to it, right? But when it comes to a car or a product, we're like, oh, wow, that's a great company that designed it, or engineers that designed it. So I think keeping that in mind, or that how Allah has designed things with different functionalities and sophistication and accuracy, and also being able to deliver over consistent billions of years, help us appreciate who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So I don't think that we will have anybody in our audience that doesn't know about Tarteel, but just in case, how would you describe Tarteel? Like what problem it solves or how it can improve someone's life?
Yeah, so the core purpose of Tartil is to help Muslims with their journey with the Quran. Especially right now, the people who tend to find the most benefit from it are those who are actually, reviewing or memorizing the Quran. Uh, we talked about some of those benefits in terms of being able to track your progress automatically, being able to correct your mistakes, even being able to help you set goals for yourself and then keep track of your progress through those goals, help you adjust if you fall behind, or help you decide what to do next as part of that journey. So Tartila has a lot of benefits for this for anybody who wants to really improve their connection with the Quran. And even if you're not at the point where you're trying to do hifz right now, even if you just want to connect with the Quran from a point of listening or understanding or whatnot, you can find recitations from famous reciters. You can find translations, you can find tafsir, and you can find as well like a number of things to help you stay committed, like streaks and badges and other fun items like that, to help you, stay connected with your journey. Like one of the things I talked about earlier is in terms of finding balance when you're trying to take on like a lot of things at once and really push yourself. Sometimes it really is quite important to have those kind of accountability partners or those companions in that journey who will help you as you walk along that journey. And so Tartil is really meant to be your Quran companion that can help you throughout your journey with the Quran, inshallah, for the rest of your life.
Beautiful. Yes, and I can definitely testify to that as well. So I think for me personally, if you're reviewing by yourself, typically you would like read it and then you'll just verify, oh, did I read it right or what have you, and then it adds to that complexity or that step that we can like, okay, I wish I didn't have to do that. And then secondly, I think sometimes it may even be that you think that you're reading something right, you may skip a verse or skip a word, even though it may not make much change. Even if you understand Arabic, there may be a thing that you make a mistake on without realizing, because it still makes sense from an Arabic perspective. So having this tag, like boom, you see that vibration going on or that ping, and then you're like, okay, what did I say wrong? Obviously, there's a lot of false positive situation as well where you were saying right and it was still detected, but I know that will get sorted out over time. So yeah, I think that can really make it easy. And as you mentioned, that Hifz is not it's not a 0-1 thing. It's not that you have become a Hafiz, you've achieved that graduation and you're done. It's actually something that's a lifestyle. Even if you memorize it as a child, if you don't review it, it's not going to stick, right? And the whole idea is to have that repetition, that connection with Quran, and it gives you to have that challenge that will put you into that lifestyle of continuing to do that. And I think utilizing this text really makes it much easier. That the tech will not tell you, well, there's something you need to review here. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for coming on and staying beyond the committed time and sharing your journey. And hopefully that makes if I were to say two things that we can get away, obviously from the other than the importance of memorizing Quran and using the tech for it, is to also utilize your time wisely, right? And that's something we definitely all need to do as an ummah better, where we are just wasting away time being a spectator. And there's important, as you said, like if you're being a spectator because you want to learn something, that's great. But other than that, we will all be asked about how we spent our time, how we earned our wealth, where we spent it, and so on and so forth. So let's try to utilize it properly. Let's try to be the best, the top 1% or the top 10% in whatever area you want to be. And then using those skills, partnering with people to solve problems that really matter. So with that, I'm going to sign off. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment, because that will help us attract more powerful guests for you to share their inspiring stories. So keep the journey going. And once again, Mohamed, thank you so much. May Allah bless you, bless your time. Jazakumullah khairan. Signing off with that. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.